Life Frew Music, brought to you by Zoomer.com and ZoomerRadio.ca.
Wow. He's descended from James Alexander, the 3rd Earl of Caledon. Peter was born in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. Of course, big man, we would say New Glasgow. Anyway, what an honour and privilege it is to sit down. It's quite humbling, actually, to be in the presence of someone so highly educated as Peter MacKay. I first met Peter when we were both advocating on behalf of victims of violent crime, and then had the honour of travelling with him twice to Afghanistan to visit the men and women of our beloved Canadian Armed Forces. Ladies and gentlemen, from Life Frew Music, I give you Peter MacKay. All right, Biggin. So I brought you a present.
I would never refuse you.
I know. J. Arthur, right?
That's the good stuff. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kindly.
You're welcome. All right. And of course.
Cheers.
Cheers, pal.
Whoops. A little spillage there.
There we go. Here's a fun question for you right off the bat.
Okay, shoot.
So when I first sort of heard of you, I of course called you Peter MacKay. What the hell happened?
Well,
when did do you know the history of when they softened it up?
You know, I think the real story is a lot of Macs got shortened coming off the ships, probably some of them down here at Pier 21.
Right.
And so MAC got shortened to MC, which got bastardized to MacKay, but the real pronunciation is Mackay.
Right.
My granddad always used to say Mackay sounded pretentious for some reason in North America.
Is that right?
Yeah, he would say as well, the Mackays had all the money.
Did he land here as a Mackay, or he was born here?
No, we're I'd be 5th generation. My son will be 6th, but no, 1700s, Alan, during the clearances.
Being here.
Yeah. The clearances, the ship Hector, which is near the Pictou County area where I grew up, was one of a number of ships that came over during the clearances. So after Culloden and all of that history. Wow. And washed ashore here. True story too. It's felt very familiar for Scots,
right,
to land in Nova Scotia. Pretty harsh environment, especially Cape Breton, but Pictou County as well. A lot like the land they left behind. So,
right.
Hence New Scotland, right?
Of course.
Nova
I mean,
Scotia.
I've always felt close to it, for sure. I mean, even it reminds me, music in my household growing up was your dad putting on a wee show with your granda and your uncles, and coming out here and these little spontaneous kind of ceilidhs that happened. The pub along the road there, the old Triangle.
Brilliant.
Been in there for years.
Well, that's right. I mean, it was so ingrained in the culture, Celtic music, Scotch and Irish.
Did you grow up with that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. And to this day, there's still so much untapped talent, I'd call it, that comes out. People break out a guitar and a fiddle, kitchen parties and kitchen ceilidhs, and it's everywhere. And, right. Some people obviously go on and make a career of it.
Alan Doyle's a great example.
Alan's a great example from Newfoundland. But, here locally, we've had some big successes. Going back a generation or more, but Alan Cameron was one of the first big Celtic music
You're talking
revivals.
John Allen?
John Allen Cameron, yeah.
I love John Allen. I hung about. It's so funny. Even when Glass Tiger was at its peak, I remember walking into pubs with him and people would say, "Who's that guy with John Allen?"
Oh, yeah.
He was, and his son Stuart was in my band for a while.
Very talented. That's right. I think I knew that.
Right.
Yeah. No, John Allen Cameron and the Rankins
Yeah.
out of Cape Breton.
Yeah.
And they've had some other, really big talent that went on. And then others too. I mean, I grew up also listening to country music.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad loved Johnny Cash, but going back, before that, we had Hank Snow. Who was really, he was like Hank Williams in some ways. He was that big, playing at the Grand Ole Opry, and, he spurned a whole generation of country music fans around Nova Scotia and Atlantic.
I've often mentioned how I see a similarity between the East Coast of Canada and Nashville, because there is that spontaneous. So everybody plays. You go, it's like, you're in Nashville and this guy's the bus driver for this artist, but all of a sudden you find out that he wrote this song that was, it's incredible, and everybody plays, whether it's a fiddle or whether it's a guitar. They're always in it. And I found in the East Coast, there's a lot of that goes on out here.
There really is. And George Canyon, who you've met.
Yes.
He's a pal of mine.
Cheers.
And, there's others. Dave Gunning is another super talent. And, more, I suppose, contemporary music. We have some big artists that are sort of on the cusp right now, but some that have made it. People like the Trews. That's a great band from the East Coast. They're from down the road in Antigonish. And we've got just a really vibrant environment right now for musicians, and a lot of great venues. You're going to play one tonight here in Dartmouth.
So, Peter, what the hell is going on? What's going on? Like, what are the changes in the political landscape that you've come by this honestly? Your father was a politician,
my dad was
right?
at it for a long time.
You grew up. What's going on? Like, according to Peter MacKay, what's changed in this political landscape, even around the world, not just Canada? What is going on?
Well, starting with the obvious, we are more polarized, and there's more division than you've seen in your lifetime. And part of that, I think, has been inflamed by prolific online activity.
Right.
And it's counterintuitive because everybody thought, well, this will bring the world closer together. We'll be able to communicate with people in different time zones in different countries, and we'll be able to settle our differences in a more diplomatic way. I don't think that's the case at all. And you have misinformation, disinformation, deliberate attempts to bring about discord and division. And politics has always been a vehicle for change, but it's also, in the wrong circumstances and power in the hands of the wrong people, it has led the world to the brink of destruction. And Alan, without using too much hyperbole, it feels like 1915. It feels like 1936. There are these malignant forces that are lining up now, whether it's happening in the Middle East, obviously Ukraine, what we're seeing in the South China Sea, parts of Africa. There are these very real divisions, if not open conflicts, that are raging that can lead to broader, inflames of the region, or even a mistake.
Right.
And I worry about that, having occupied certain offices in Ottawa, the opportunity for a miscommunication that could lead to, a assassination, that's not beyond the realm of possibility, that you could see a missile strike. I mean, these are very, very real and very serious subjects that a lot of people, I'm hoping, in our capitals are keeping their eye on.
In layman's terms, for me growing up as a wee boy in Scotland and then coming over to Canada, in layman's terms, I used to think that politicians were there to serve us, to serve the public in the best interest. Now, unless I'm mistaken, so many of them have become celebrities in their own right and are, for want of a better term, self-serving and answerable only to the hidden elitist agendas. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does, Alan, and it's unfortunate that we are seeing fewer and fewer people, I think, drawn to public life. And this is not meant to be self-serving, having been in that line of work. But a number of things have happened. It's become very punishing for people in terms of their families, in terms of digging up, whether they got along with other kids in the sandbox going back to their kindergarten days. And it's also the demands and the expectations are really no longer possible in many cases for a government to move some of these big muscle movements in a way that is going to happen within the allotted time, right? You have 4 years in most mandates to get things done. And things have become infinitely more complex. The size of bureaucracy, the challenges, things like housing, immigration, national security, the economy itself, and the issues around affordability right now are what's on everybody's lips.
Right.
But to your point, people do come into politics now, it seems, with this feeling that it's celebrity and
Yeah.
it's about them. And
Exactly.
it's not. It's
Exactly.
about public service.
Of course.
And, the tradition years ago, I suppose, was people came having accomplished something in another walk of life, another profession. It seems now we're getting people getting into politics, right out of the gate and saying, oh, well, this is going to be my lifelong career.
Right.
And in some cases with very limited experience that can be brought to bear.
Give us a wee bit of your background. Like, so, for example, I watched my dad entertain us in the house, and then I started entertaining in the classroom, and then I followed this pathway, and here I am. Give us a wee bit of background and getting into the political scene.
Well, it's funny. I swore I'd never get involved in politics, in part because of my dad. And he got involved, relatively young after a career practicing law. He and my mom, were living on the sort of the farm, the homestead. And, politics then, as now, was hard on families. My parents parted ways when I was quite young. And that also was a bit of a, off-putting deterrent for me ever getting involved in politics. But I followed, in some ways, footsteps that he had laid down. I went into the practice of law, started here in this city of Halifax, worked in the public prosecution service, did some defense work, ended up back in the public prosecution service. And politics kind of came calling. It wasn't a prescribed path I was on.
Right.
Met a young guy named Jean Charest, who was leading the Progressive Conservative Party at the time. And he said, I knew your dad, and we're rebuilding the party. They'd had a pretty catastrophic meltdown in 1993, and they were rebuilding the party. And I thought, well, maybe I'll take a look at it. And in kicking the tires about running, I was forbidden by the director of public prosecution service. You're not allowed to run. I said, well, I think I am allowed to run, for starters, and I know a little bit about, what this is going to take. And it kind of turned into a big unwanted brouhaha where they dismissed me. I sued the government of Nova Scotia. I won the seat, won the nomination, and off I went. But contrary to what a lot of people might think, that I didn't grow up sort of at my father's knee, lusting for politics. It was, it just sort of happened. And it seemed like a natural extension, to be honest, Alan, to do something bigger than myself and even my province. And I was enjoying practicing law. In fact, I loved it. I'm back doing that again. But politics is a calling, and it should be, and a noble one at that.
Yeah. I got a small taste of what you go through, because there's no winning. Like, either way, it doesn't matter whose side you're on. They're, as you mentioned about being online, I supported you.
I appreciated that enormously.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people that did, and I felt strongly that and still do, that I think you'd make a fine prime minister. But as soon as I put my hand up and said I like Peter MacKay, boom, they come.
Oh God,
they come, and it's a shame because we should have the right and the freedom to support who we feel would make, without being shot down.
Of course. Yeah, and that's the insidious part of it, frankly, right now, is that there's a lot of people out there, rightly, who say, I'm not going to subject myself to that, let alone my family. I mean, I have young kids. They were even younger when I was, sort of coming to the end of my time as a member of parliament and a minister. And, I jokingly tell them, like, don't Google my name. because there's a lot of bad stuff.
Of course.
Still there.
Yeah.
And you saw it. And you anybody that's in the public eye, yourself included, artists, athletes,
For sure.
Musicians, it seems that the rules of engagement are gone. Anything is out there now for attack. And I'll tell you something I've been sort of thinking about a lot lately is, artificial intelligence and how that plays into these misrepresentations. There's obviously a real advantage to be able to use computer technology and new technology. But I saw something recently demonstrated where they had 3 clips of Barack Obama, and he was, sort of at a press conference on the news, and they showed it to us. It was a seminar I was at, and they said, okay, which one of these is artificial intelligence? So I'm looking at it, it seems a little glitchy, and, his words are a little mumbled. All of them. He didn't say any of the words that they were showing it. Like every single clip was computer generated.
Yeah.
I thought, this is startling.
As a musical buddy, you might have heard the name Brett Kissel.
Sure.
And Brett just went public recently reminding his fans and the public that some of the stuff that's been going out there on him is not him. They just sampled his voice. They sampled, I guess, a couple of shots, and they have him saying whatever they want him to say. I mean, scary stuff.
Well, you would know much more about this than I in terms of the music industry, but I heard recently that Kiss have now kind of downloaded their entire, musical careers, and they have images of them on stage that are touring.
I'm not surprised.
And, that again is remarkable. But what about, I guess the lawyer in me says, well, what about intellectual property?
Right.
What about people's ability to control both their image and their art, their music, whatever it might be?
It'll probably be like anything else. It'll be like the Wild West, and it'll be a nightmare for a while, and then hopefully someone will wrangle it in a little bit.
Well, that brings us back to politics. I mean, that's the role of legislators and lawyers to see that we're keeping parameters around this. And again, I'm not promoting the law in any particular direction, but there has to be a rules-based order, and we seem very much on the precipice sometimes of letting go of that, and that's when you see the chaos and the destruction of what's happening right on the doorstep of Europe, by the way, in Ukraine, and all of these countries now who are facing the reality that they better prepare themselves. They better brace themselves. And that, to me, is going to be, for the next number of years, the biggest challenge, is countries, including our own, and including our valuable territory in the Arctic, which is resource-rich and a vulnerability for North America. We've got to invest. And I want to say to you, you may not even realize the impact that you had in visiting our troops in Afghanistan. I get kind of emotional thinking about it because that was such an important time.
Yeah, I don't think people, when I take great pride in mentioning to the audiences that I've been in Afghanistan 4 times, and I've been in Bosnia twice, and Kuwait, and
Gulf of Oman.
Right, and up in the Arctic. And of course, if they don't take the time to really absorb what I'm saying, they might just think, are you promoting the war machine? And of course you're not. And you know that.
And that's sort of a misnomer about artists sometimes, thinking that because we have people in uniform who, I have to say it, sign up, unlimited liability, they're putting their lives on the line when they go out the door, and especially when they're deploying in some of these places that are hot spots. But every day, emergency responders the same. And it's not about war. Like, there's nobody I've ever met in uniform that wants to avoid conflict more than soldiers. They've seen it. And you talk to veterans who've been there, and they'll be the first to say we need to do everything we can to avoid falling into that trap again. And yet, here we are. And it's not the soldiers. It's the politicians and the leaders and the dictators.
Yeah, and what it meant to them, I mean, going over there and just bringing a wee touch of Canada, taking the time to enjoy a meal with them, throw an arm around a shoulder and say, how you doing? And then entertain them. It just meant, I'm emotional too. I started out thinking it was just going to be a one-off. I went once thinking, okay, there's a wacky idea. 19 times later.
Yeah.
And
that's a lot. I also greatly appreciate your humility, because I've seen you in those venues, and I've seen you, the way you go above and beyond in investing in those young men and women, our greatest citizens. They're doing real important work. And you're right. It's a piece of home. It's a familiarity. It's a song they knew. They knew you on the radio.
Not many people can say that the Minister of National Defence was his personal roadie.
I was your roadie there a couple of times, I remember. And you showed a lot of guts that I know a lot of those soldiers admired. 42 degrees, on the back of the frigate. And, you were under the weather to begin with. That was an extraordinary time. And, playing Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone.
52 degrees in a ship in Oman. I noticed, actually, I never realized that until I was with the troops. I suffer from a little bit of claustrophobia that I never knew about. Yeah. And it happened to me in the Arctic when we went inside and and it's just that vacuum. And it happened to me, I was in one of our land vehicles that the air conditioning went off and the mechanism shut down in Kandahar. And it took them like half an hour to get us out. And then, of course, that time with you on the ship, it was just stifling. Oh, yeah. But the show must go on, man. Right?
Well, you certainly did. And
you got me glasses of water, and it was so funny. Like, here you are, the Minister of National Defence, like, say, Alan, you need a glass of water, son. Peter, what does music really, really mean to you? And I realize it's, it sounds like a frivolous question, but the deeper we go, it becomes really profound. What does music really, really mean to you in the career that you've had and the life that you've had?
Well, Alan, as a sort of consumer of music, whereas you're the provider of music, it means different things to everybody, of course. And I kind of chuckle to myself when I hear, my 11-year-old son come home from school and say, hey, there's this great new band called Aerosmith. And I'm like, yeah, I think I've heard of them. And, and he's listening to AC/DC in this hockey dressing room before they go out to play and that type of thing. And it's moments in time that I associate with certain bands and music and songs that were meaningful to me at a particular moment in my life. And so when I hear those songs, it's triggering, and it's, sometimes it's a sad song. Sometimes, it was a meaningful song at your wedding or at your high school or college graduation. So music is kind of the soundtrack to life. I mean, that sounds maybe a bit hokey,
no.
But I can remember listening to cassettes of, Def Leppard in high school, or one of my my favorite bands, and they just lost their lead singer, Miles Goodman, was April Wine, and that because they were from here, mm-hmm. and yet they were big, they were really making it on the international stage, and those songs were just so iconic for me. And then I saw them years later. I'd only ever heard them on the radio, and I don't know if I've ever told you this. You came back, and we could maybe talk a little bit about you playing in New Glasgow a couple of years ago. But you'd played near that venue probably 30 years before, and now I'm dating us a little bit. You'd played with a group of bands when you were on the Ascendancy. I remember going to see Glass Tiger. In fact, I snuck into the concert, if truth be told.
You can leave the money for your ticket on the way out.
Well, probably the equivalent of this at the time. And so, those are just wonderful milestone memories. And I really do hope that my kids, yours, everybody's, have that affection and that affinity to things that were important to them and
At the-
associate it with music.
At the peak of your, so again, as layman, or as a layman, I have this thing where you think politicians are rather stiff, right? You know, it's one thing to hear that LeBron listens to such and such before he goes on at the big game, or Wayne Gretzky. And you tend to think of politicians as being stiff, like, and that music, you know, does music play before, what is the big game? You're all going into Parliament to argue out a point on it. In a politician's life like that, we would never think in those terms, but was music important to you as a clearing your head and getting away from the shit that was going on in Ottawa? And
Absolutely, it was. And you know, there were certain songs that I would listen to. I'd come back from Ottawa. I had this routine, you know, where I'd come home virtually every weekend if I wasn't traveling or off to some other far-flung place. And you know, by then we were into CDs, and I played certain songs. And there was one, and I'm a shameless promoter of local musicians,
that's okay.
but Joel Plaskett.
Oh, yeah.
I loved his music.
Of course.
And it almost had a throwback feel to it, a bit like Sloan.
Right.
And I loved older music. Growing up, my mom played Elvis all the time. My dad, you know, was more into country music and Johnny Horton and Johnny Cash. But I loved those bands, and they were from here. And in fact, you know, one of the songs that Nazanin and I played at our wedding was Tears Roll Down the Face of the Earth. And you know, here we are in Halifax, Joel Plaskett, Emergency, There's a Reason I Love This Town. I mean, I just drank those songs up. And, you know, and a lot of those songs, you know, you also associate with being out with your pals and bars and memorable nights out on the razzle. So, yeah, music, I can honestly say, was a big part of my life. We had a concert up here with Sammy Hagar for the Canadian Forces.
Okay.
And it was amazing just to see, like you, how, and he's American, but how he bonded with these soldiers, and they wanted to be around him and be with him, and they remembered, you know, Van Halen. I remember seeing Rod Stewart on Citadel Hill, and I know you've performed with him. And so, you know, I almost feel kind of hokey saying this, but it, you know, living vicariously through other people, musicians, athletes, ties you into certain moments in your life as well.
Right. I tell you a great wee story. I sang in Dallas, and after I came off stage, someone comes to the dressing room and says, there's someone who'd like to meet the lead singer. So my road manager immediately, at the time, said, oh, I'm coming with you, because he always knew it could be something important. So they take me in the room, Peter, and it's Willie Nelson.
Oh, wow.
Right? And he's sitting there, hello. And as soon as I spoke, he went, oh, you're Scottish. And I said, yeah. And it was all downhill from there because the first thing he offered me was a scotch.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, Willie, I said, I don't drink scotch. You're okay. So then he rolls this big fat divvy and he goes, yeah. And I said, no, I don't smoke, Willie. And I'm 0 for 2, and I'm thinking, get me out of this, like me. And he wants to talk about golf.
Wow.
And at the time, I had good legs and was still playing soccer, football.
Yeah.
So I said to him, I don't like golf, Willie. And it was almost like, can you get this guy out of here? It was just a disaster.
Oh, that's
but
hilarious.
What a character, you know?
Yeah. He toured through Nova Scotia and his bus broke down. I remember hearing about that.
Do you know, he just did an amazing thing. I played a wee gig in Toronto, and you get your paycheck, and you pay your band, and then all of a sudden they handed me this wee envelope, and it's like courtesy of Willie Nelson, and it was there was $1,000 in one envelope. Feed your band, put booze on the bus and food on the bus. And the other one was a $500 gas certificate for put gas in the bus on the road again, courtesy of Willie Nelson. I thought it was classic.
That's amazing.
Yeah. You know,
that's the humanity of big stars that sometimes people don't see. So I mean, that's a great story, and it reminds you of both the frailties and the, the personalities and, just different trials and tribulations. I mean, you must have a million stories from travel.
Tons of them. Tons of them. But, I mean, you're part of one of my greatest, I think you'll know where I'm going with this. You're part of one of the greatest regrets of my entire life.
Also tied to this city, if it's where you're going.
And you know what that is.
Yes.
Why did I... So, for those of you watching, Peter had arranged for me to get to a luncheon with Her Majesty the Queen, but it was with a lot of people, and, I didn't get to meet her there, but she was right there with Prince Philip. And then you left me because you had to scoot back to repatriate 3 of our
we'd had casualties,
beloved soldiers. And then you came back, and I'd already changed my flight a couple of times, and you intimated that if I changed my flight again, you thought that I could meet Her Majesty the Queen in a very private way. And I got on the plane and I went home. And as the plane was taxiing, you sent me a photograph of you with Her Majesty, and I will regret that to the day I die.
Yeah, I mean, I know you had great respect for Her Majesty, and
I'm a loyalist. I am a loyalist.
I still honestly have a hard time singing "God Save the King." I was at an event at the Legion for the 75th anniversary of Normandy, and when we said it, it was probably the first time I'd sung it out loud. "God Save the King," and I got a loonie the other day with King Charles on it.
Wow!
Oh, wow! Okay, this is happening.
I hear some of the paper money has gone for big numbers.
Yeah.
Like somebody paid like $17,000 for a £5 note or something like that.
Yeah, I mean it's a sign, that we're kind of moving with the generation.
Have you met him, Peter? Have you met?
I have. Yeah, he came here a couple of times with Camilla, and really nice guy. A lot of his mother in him. He again was here in Halifax and took the time whenever, 2 things I noticed about Her Majesty whenever she was in crowds. She would look for soldiers and seek them out if they were in the crowd or along the parade route, and children. And he does the same. He is, I believe, representative of the Crown with the Black Watch, which again has huge ties to Scotland and the UK.
Of course.
And Kilted Regiment, the whole bit. And so he was in Nova Scotia, and he met with a number of members of this Black Watch regiment. And a really interesting thing about him is that he's a big proponent of wool, Scottish wool, and sheep farms. And we happen to have one in a place called Lismore, Nova Scotia. And so we arranged for him to meet some of the folks there. And, he's obviously still kind of getting into that role that he's been groomed for his whole life. But the royal family has an incredible history of service, including, Harry and
they get heavily
Will.
maligned as well. Of course, they get maligned.
They do.
Right.
I'll tell you a very quick funny story about the first time I met the Queen was in Belfast. There was a Canadian ship in the harbor. I have family. My mother, her sister is there, just passed, born on the same day as the Queen. And there was a reception that the ship's company, and I was there, I think as foreign minister, and we got invited to go to this English country garden reception. And she was there, but it was very quiet. Of course, the troubles in Belfast, they were still keeping it pretty tight. And I took my aunt, and we got to meet the Queen.
Wow.
And the conversation, Alan, I'll never forget, is we were in the thick of it in Afghanistan at the time. And, she inquired, why are you here? What's happening in Canada? And then she says, my grandson, Harry, he's training in Canada. I said, oh, yes, we're very aware, Your Majesty. We're keeping that on the down low. He was at Suffield, Alberta, for his first deployment with an infantry unit. So they're training in Suffield. And she says, I swear I've never told this story, but she says, keep an eye on that lad. He's a bit like his grandfather, a bit of a cad. And I bet you it wasn't 2 weeks that there was this picture of Harry in a bar. Then Prince Harry called Cowboys in Calgary. I don't know if you've ever been.
I've been in Calgary. I played it.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Played it.
Anyway, so it made all the British tabloids that he was at Cowboys, with some of his army pals.
Do you ever think your calling will bring you back to the political scene, Peter, or do you think you're done?
Oh, look, that's a tough one, Alan. I mean, I'll never say never. It's been almost a decade, which is raced by. My kids are still very young, and the demands, the rigors of public life make it pretty challenging at this stage. But look, I love my country.
I know you do.
Love,
I know you do.
The avenue that politics provides to get things done. And I really genuinely wish, in retrospect, that I was able to get more things done, whether it was military procurement. I spent time at the Department of Justice, and there were big issues at the time that the country was wrestling with then as now. And sometimes, and it sounds cliche, but you need a champion inside government. And you inevitably have to band together with other ministers and other members of parliament sometimes, depending on the configuration, if it's a minority or a majority government. But it's an incredible experience. I mean, I feel so blessed to have had that time representing people of Pictou County and Antigonish and Guysborough, the constituency that I grew up in, and this province. It's a remarkable experience, and you get to meet fascinating people
Absolutely.
like yourself,
Well,
which I would never have had that opportunity. Were it not
and
for
likewise,
politics.
I mean, I met you for the very first time when I was working with victims of violent crime,
That's right.
and I sent a letter to Parliament, and Prime Minister Harper answered and apologised for not being able to attend, and he sent a personal cheque from himself and his wife, and he said, if it happens next year, I'll be there. And he stayed true to his word, and you came with him, and that was when I met you for the first time. You
I remember that.
Leland?
Our hair was a little longer then.
Yeah, and maybe more of it. Have you ever had a pint of Guinness in Dublin?
I have. Yeah, as recently as last year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Quick connection there. I mentioned my mother being Irish. My granddad was in the Royal Navy, and he wound up here in Nova Scotia. When he retired, he was through both World Wars, Merchant Navy after the Royal Navy, and said, I'm going to give it up and become a blueberry farmer, which he did. He retired in Centerville. But he had spent time at Trinity College. And then his dad was a Church of Ireland minister and had spent a period in Valentia Island, which is why my daughter is named Valentia.
Oh.
And my wife and I were engaged there. So I feel, both north and south,
Yeah.
I do feel a bit of, connection to. And so I was there with Deloitte last year at a conference in Dublin. Amazing. Electric.
You know, it's funny. I was raised a wee Protestant,
I know.
right? I was raised a Protestant.
You and I both.
Right? I was raised a Protestant in a Catholic town. And I grew up with that whole religious segregation. And when Glass Tiger, we got the chance to go over to Dublin and record with the Chieftains. And so we were in Dublin for a week. And for the first 3 nights, I wouldn't come out of the hotel because I had this ridiculous view that I was going to come out there as a Protestant and somebody would just want to punch me in the nose, where nothing could have been further from the truth.
Well, you weren't sporting Ranger tattoos at that time.
That's true. Finally, I come out into Grafton Street in Dublin, and it was just wonderful.
That's magic.
Wonderful. You have a pint of Guinness in Grafton Street and on the Guinness Estates.
I went through Dublin and Scotland, Ireland on a rugby tour one time.
Right.
And we wound up in Dublin, and there was a bartender strike. And so people were in the pubs that had no idea what they were doing, and they were handing out pints of Guinness and everything else. And most of that night I remember, but oh my, it is a fantastic city.
You know what's incredible? The original concept of the video for my song with the Chieftains was that this old theologian character was going to give us a tour of, like he was showing us around. And it didn't make it to the final cut. But even in the most obscure places, like it's obvious in Dublin, the director would go, and cut. And the old guy would say, and there's a wee pub, Alan, just round the cut, right? I mean, but they took us out to a bog. I mean, we were in Wellington boots, and he was educating us. So this is where there was 3 IRA guys, and they were trapped in this building over here, and the black and tans came in, and they had them cornered, and the referee, I beg your pardon, the director would go, and cut. And he would say, and over this hill, Alan, there's a wee pub. And sure enough, Peter, the size of this room, a wee Kaylee going on, drinking a pint of Guinness, and music meant everything.
It's such a magical place. All of Ireland, really, and Scotland, and and so many of the people of this province and this country trace their ancestry there.
Right.
And again, the music of that part of the world, Celtic music more broadly, has it's gone everywhere, and it's very present in a lot of your music. But I have a question for you.
Okay.
Van Morrison.
Yeah.
Have you ever met or spent any time with him?
I never met him. Like, Sam went over to record with the Chieftains, and Van had been gobbling up the Chieftains, and every day
Right.
Sam was getting ready, and it was like, oh, Van says tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, Van says the next day. I never met him, but I sure loved his music.
Yeah, I grew up listening to him, early days, and the Chieftains. In fact, again, my mother was a huge fan of the Chieftains.
I often say that we worked with the real rock stars of Dublin, not you too.
Yeah,
The Chieftains.
true story.
Peter, we'll leave on this note. The podcast is called Life Frew Music. Sum it up for me. Give me a little take on your Life Frew music. What it means.
Well, being here with you has been a highlight, frankly. Just getting to know you as I have over the years, and sharing a love of music, your music in particular. And my son and I, Keon, were listening to it on the way in. I said, "You're going to meet this guy."
Wow.
So that's been special. Alan, music, as I said before, has provided me certain motivations. It's given me memories and themes of pertinent certain periods in my life that were, important to me and me alone. So it's a very personal question, when you say, what does music mean to you? But to me, it means family. It means being grounded. It's authentic. It's being in touch with who you are, where you came from, and what you care about.
Do you know, one of the things that inspired, of course I didn't realize at the time, one of the things that would inspire a podcast like this is I could take you back 35 years, 34 years, 33 years, whatever it is. And I'm in this band, and I've got a song called Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone or Someday. And it started out with people coming to me and saying, Alan, how did you know I was feeling like that when you wrote that song?
Yeah.
Now, at first you think it's an idiotic question.
Not,
you think, right?
Not at all.
And then you eventually just give in, and you realize. And of course, my dad died, and it was his funeral, and my cousin, she got married to your son, and you realize that as the artist on this side, just how important that connective tissue is.
Well, I saw it and witnessed it a number of times, but we've talked about it. Seeing those Canadian soldiers in their uniform, literally transmitted back home through your music and bopping away there in stifling heat on the back of a battleship. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. That's the power of music.
Peter, I thank you.
It's been a real pleasure, Alan.
I thank you, pal.
We'll see you soon.
Cheers. So there you have it. The one and only Peter MacKay. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And Peter, can't thank you enough, pal. Cheers.